being between you and lunch, so we'll try to keep things lively. I know it's also a little chilly in here. I'm not sure if that's to keep us awake or adjust the temperature at all, but we'll try to keep things lively, and that'll keep you warm and awake and ready for hearing a little bit more about teacher leadership. We have been talking this morning a lot about these tensions between teacher leadership. Is it given? Is it taken? The authority piece on that. I think we talked about Nancy's colleague, I want to say Dale, and about his interest. That even the idea came up, this notion that really was it about him or was it about the students? So I want to start by taking us back a little bit to the idea of teacher leadership. Why teacher leadership? And thinking a little bit, we're always returning back to where we're going with students. At the end of the day, we know now from research that teachers are the most significant school-based influence on student learning. It's an oft-quoted fact. More and more studies reinforce this idea. And specifically even talking about the fact that teachers have an even more significant influence on the students who need them most. So teacher quality is really important, teaching quality. The issue, of course, is that in today's schools, generally we have one teacher for a group of students. So that my son, when he's learning reading and he's in first grade, his ability to learn reading is dependent upon the one teacher who he's been assigned. And even in a high school, by subject, he's learning math from the math teacher who he has been assigned. And teacher quality varies. The effectiveness of teachers, the strategies they use, but more importantly, the experiences that they bring is important as well, and those vary. Here's some data from Boston where I work. We have various ethnicities represented. We have male and female teachers, obviously mostly female. Teachers are in various ages as well. And all of these have benefits to students, that students would benefit from being exposed to all of these things. We don't want a student to go through school and only have female teachers, or only have black teachers, or only have young teachers. That there's a benefit to all of these, right? In addition, of course, teachers bring their own personal passions. To have my daughter, who's very musical, have a teacher who also has a passion for music once in a while. We want to have a variety of kinds of experiences, whether it's travel or a passion for the environment, because students' experiences and needs vary as well. Here's some data on Boston's population. And of course, students bring up all kinds of different interests. So the traditional notion of schooling, where each group of students really is assigned one teacher, makes very little sense if we're concerned at the bottom line about student learning, about every student learning every day, every student having access to quality teaching. So as we think about the power of teacher leadership, one of the most important benefits of it really is the notion that when teachers are collaborating in ways and influencing one another's instruction, each student is no longer at the mercy of the one teacher to whom they are assigned. Every teacher can have an off year. Maybe you're taking care of elderly parents, or you're a novice teacher for whatever reason. You're less effective in a given year, or because students' needs vary, a particular teacher is more effective with some students than others. But every student needs an excellent teaching every day. And so when teachers are collaborating, students are able to really be the beneficiaries of the collective expertise of the teachers on that team. Every culture around the world has these proverbs, right, about the power of being stronger together. When spiders unite, they can tie down a lion is one that's oft quoted. The problem with schools, of course, is that it's just way more complex than tying down a lion. It's actually a lot more challenging. There's a lot of moving parts. And there are, teaching and school improvement is incredibly complex. But notion and the core message is important. This notion that when teachers perform better, there's just this notion that teachers perform better together, that together, united, we're stronger. This note here is from a study that was done in 2011. It's one of the first studies, a recent study, in which 100 schools were, of New York schools, I believe, were examined. And it was discovered that even in schools where teachers had low human capital, they didn't necessarily have the highest degrees, and maybe fewer of them were certified, whatever, they had less content knowledge, those students were performing better in schools where they had high social capital. So even where the teachers didn't individually maybe know that much, by working together, they were able to have greater student outcomes. So one book that really powerfully illustrates and explains why there's strength in numbers is this book called Professional Capital, which I really recommend. I find it really valuable and inspirational. It's a great book study for teacher leaders. And this book really talks about this notion of professional capital, which is the composite really of human capital, social capital, and also decisional capital. Kind of a newish concept, but the idea is that in order to really reach every child and not have the teaching every child just be a throwaway phrase that we all use, yeah, we all want all kids to learn. This book is like, no, really, how can we make sure every kid was really learning? Every kid really does have access to the expertise needed for them to learn every day. This book helps illustrate that through one of the examples it gives is the 10,000 hours of expertise is basically the name. Thank you, Blackwell. The notion that it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. So if it takes 10,000 hours, that would be about 8 years of classroom teaching. So we can't say, now, Nancy told us this morning that most teachers actually have, what, 1.5 years of classroom teaching experience? So we can't, our children cannot wait until teachers have 8 years of teaching experience to really be benefiting. It's just not possible. It's not fair to children not to have teacher leadership and teachers influencing one another, because it's unfair to the students, the many students, the majority of students who have teachers who have less than 8 years of classroom teaching. This book also reminds us that in other professional settings, because the work is so complex of teaching, there are so many critical decisions that teachers have to make in their work. We are constantly making decisions, and in settings where the outcomes are uncertain, there's not a clear decision to be made. You have to use your professional judgment. There's no algorithm that can make the decisions that you have to make every day, and you're making so many different kinds of decisions in one day. In areas like medicine, you have grand rounds so that even novices can learn from the mistakes and experiences of more veteran teachers, doctors. In law, you have case law. Lawyers depend upon case law so that they can learn about the outcomes of cases that have happened in other areas. Education, largely, we're not organized to be able to share our knowledge base. I mean, I've learned a lot from Amanda, the 7th grader, who, who just really, I learned more in the year that I taught Amanda English language arts than she learned probably about English language arts. But if I just keep that to myself and I'm not working on a team with other colleagues, others can't also listen from Amanda. Everybody doesn't have to teach Amanda to learn the lessons I learned from her when I taught her. So education today is generally not organized in such a way that it lets us to, allows us to build and tap into this knowledge base of professional capital and education. So this brings us to this idea of leadership. What does this have to do with leadership and teacher leadership? And distributed leadership in particular. So some important things to think about. I'm going to present 2 big ideas about leadership that are true outside of education. This isn't specifically school leadership. And the first is that leadership is really influence. It's influence that happens through interaction. And so leadership can be happening whether or not you're called a leader or not, right? Whether or not you get elected to be in the legislature, as you would say I was trying to do, or whether or not someone has crowned you to be the whatever grade level team leader, right? Leadership is influence. It happens, it's exerted by both the leaders and the followers, that it happens intentionally as well as unintentionally, and it's definitely positive as well as negative, often more powerfully in negative ways. So any of you who've tried to introduce a new idea or initiative in your school, especially principals maybe, you said, okay, we're going to be starting a new literacy program. Teacher leader who crosses their arms and roll their eyes. That is leadership. It's really powerful. They may not have realized that they just convinced half the staff not to go along with you about that new literacy curriculum. That's powerful leadership. And until we recognize everyone, teachers, principals, formal leaders, informal leaders, until we recognize that leadership is always happening all the time, and that every one of you is always leading, whether you realize it or not, again, in positive or in negative ways, we can't really tap into the power of that. There's a lot of power in being able to think about who is influencing, how are they influencing, and how then can we make some high leverage decisions about how to channel and harness that leadership power and potential on the staff. There's a number of research studies that come out of the National Center for School Leadership, which I noticed recently, the organization just changed its name, but it's Laithwood and his colleagues who have done a lot of studies on leadership. And they've found that leadership is not only the second most significant school-based influence, of course the first one being teaching, right? But the most important leadership actions that leaders take is that they are supporting teachers and the quality of teaching. So leadership is pretty key. So the second big idea has to do with the fact that leadership is about setting direction. It's not just about influence, but you're influencing people to move in a particular direction. And you're leading others in that direction. That's the influence part. So my daughter in high school was on a crew team. And when she started with the crew team, which I knew nothing about. I knew there were boats in the water. I mean, I live in Boston. You see them go by. They're really beautiful. She came home one day and she said, you know, Mom, guess what? I'm in seat 6. And I'm thinking, great, honey. You get in that boat and you go. Turns out, unbeknownst to me, is anyone here familiar with crew? You can help me maybe with some of these terms and things. Turns out that each seat has a really important position and a really different skill set is needed for these boats. There's one person who's sitting forward and everyone else is sitting in the opposite direction, backward. You need the person who everybody can see with somebody, you need somebody with good form because everyone else is following them. Everybody has to be coordinated, well-timed. You've got to have some people, you can't just get in there and with any old stick or paddle or an oar and paddle where you want to. There's a few people who are, you know, every other person is paddling or rowing?
Rowing.
Thank you. Rowing. I told you, I don't know nothing. Out the right side and so a few people are on the left side. And that's all really has to be coordinated. I think it's a really powerful metaphor because in schools, we all want to get to the finish line. We all want every kid to learn every day. And what you have in a school, everybody's just grabbing whatever kind of paddle or oar or stick they can find, getting in that boat and just paddling. And some are sitting this way and some are sitting this way. And they're just trying to get to that finish line. And oftentimes the principal maybe, I don't know if that's the person, the coxswain who can see where the boat is going, is trying to get people to coordinate. And some teachers, maybe teachers and even powerful teacher leaders are saying, well, no, I know that's where you're headed, but I know what my kids need. I'm going this way. That's the teacherpreneur concept, which I'm not particularly fond of for this reason. this isn't about you. This isn't about your 25 students either. This is about the boat. Are we concerned about every child? Or are we concerned about a few children at the expense of others? So it's a new framing for thinking about what's the purpose of teacher leadership and what it requires from all of us in terms of communication and mediation and collaboration skills. Because when you're working in a school, you're working in a boat, and you really can't take just your part of the boat in a different direction. It's not helping, it's not going to succeed for you, and it's not going to succeed for the rest of the kids. This is a favorite book we use in our teacher leadership training, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It says if you could get all the people in an organization rowing in the same direction, you could dominate any industry, any market, against any competition at any time. I like this quote. I actually found it after I had been using this metaphor, but it also picks up on that same, the power of that metaphor. So here's where we think about distributed leadership, and sometimes people talk about distributed leadership as, oh yeah, we're going to distribute leadership this year. There's different ways to think about it. There's different ways to think about it, but from what I'm describing here, you can understand then really that what you're doing is when you're taking a distributed perspective, you're recognizing that leadership is already distributed, that your school is full of stealth leadership, and that the strategy then instead is to recognize where is leadership happening, in what ways, what's it influencing, who's influencing who, through what interactions, and how can I better channel or harness that? How can I, maybe as a formal leader, how can the formal leaders in the school influence those informal leadership actions that are happening to really get the boat going in the same direction? I think these bullets kind of summarize so those two leadership ideas and help us to think about them in context of distributed leadership. I referenced the Lathwood studies earlier. They have two great documents. In 2006, they came out with one called 7 Strong Claims About Successful School Leadership. And I think recognizing that so little has been known about school leadership and its influence on student learning, they began to come out with some studies. And what's nice is that every couple of years you sort of see an update. So in 2006, they had this, and then in 2010 or 11, there was another one called 10 Strong Claims about successful school leadership. And so it's just been a fun project to watch and to see how the thinking evolves as they're building upon the prior lessons. But one thing that came out in this one was looking across, and they're talking head teachers or principals in England. This is a UK study. Over 100 schools, districts were studied in this, schools were studied in this 3-year study. That even when the way this study describes it is that leadership is practically unlimited when you think about the fact that everybody is potentially a leader. The leadership potential of the school is nearly unlimited. And that the principals don't have less power because everyone else is sharing power and is using it in focused ways. In fact, the power of influence is increased. So then the question is, what are some different ways that people might be leading, informal as well as informal ways? People lead in sustained ways as well as occasional ways, right? Somebody might come and speak at a conference, and that's teacher leadership, but it also would be teacher leadership if you're leading a periodic meeting, or you're just the novice teacher who's always asking that question, always asking an annoying question. Right? A student teacher who's sitting with you and saying, what's the impact on student learning? Why are you doing that? That's leadership, because it's forcing you to rethink what's the connection between my decisions and student learning. It might be professional as well as logistical. When I say professional, I'm talking about tied to the knowledge base. That is the provenance of teaching and learning. Logistical is something teacher leaders sometimes are in charge of bus duty, and that's because it's a logistical thing that has to happen. But frankly, anybody could be doing bus duty. That's not requiring the master's degree that you have in teaching and learning, right, and in pedagogy. So I think about professional roles as a separate kind of category. Teacher leadership also can be compensated and it can be volunteer. And I do have strong opinions about that, just because I think that teacher leaders, the ones I know anyway, they don't have like extra time. They're not like sitting around thinking of things they can do with their spare time. And when you think about the work that has to happen in schools, the work that teacher leaders or formal teacher leaders are working on, if it's important work, and it has to happen, it should be compensated. If it's not important, they shouldn't be doing it. And if it's not tied to moving the school, if it's tied to moving the school forward, it needs to be a part of the school district's system or policy. So I think formal roles could be compensated, but there's of course lots of informal sort of volunteer and spontaneous things that teachers do. So it makes a lot of sense then that within a school, all teachers might be influencing one another in all kinds of positive and negative ways, but there are some reasons why, it's really hard. And we touched on the tensions. Really, every presentation that we've had today has touched on the tensions there. This notion that, is it the teachers who should be saying, hey, I want to lead, or is it the school district that should be saying, hey, I want you to lead? There's that tension and that push-pull there. So to tell you a little bit about myself and my work and background is that I work in I work with the Boston schools, and I do a lot of training of both teacher leaders as well as principals. And we have developed a teacher leadership a leadership development program for teacher leaders, and from that we've learned a lot about the conditions that support teacher leaders. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the practical strategies and share some tools with you next in these areas. But I think what's important here is that what we feel like we're learning, our current thinking, is that there's a lot of learning that has to be had on both sides. That this isn't just about training teacher leaders better, that school and district leaders also have some training and some serious learning to do in order to make this work. So we're going to talk about these 4 areas, and I'm going to share some tools and strategies with you. We're doing on time. I think what I want to do is find out how many of you have some technology or with you, a computer, you're connected to the internet right here. Yeah, at least a few people in each row. How about on this side? At least a few people. So what we're going to do, think about it. I think what I'm going to actually do is this, the tools, and can you take some and pass them back up? Or you just get that. These slides, as well as the tools I'm about to present, are all downloadable from the internet. And I'm going to take you through some of them now. And if you are sitting near someone with a tablet or a laptop, or you can shift your chair, maybe people can kind of adjust their screen so you can see one another. I'm going to show you how to access these so that you can use them in your own work. I find that's why So what this paper has is a QR code. If you have a red laser or any other QR reader, you can just scan this little black and white picture, and if not, you can type in this URL here, and you would get to the question about access? Okay, so I know that some of you will still be trying to log in, but I think that being able to take you straight into this and work along with me on this, then will allow you to put this into direct use in your own work. So what do leaders need to know and be able to do? That teacher leaders have some learning and also and preparation, as well as school and district leaders have some learning and preparation. So first of all, if teacher leadership is influence, it's about setting direction and leading others in that direction. Do we want teachers who are not accomplished teachers doing that, right? If we're going to be cultivating and trying to maximize the power of teacher leadership to make sure every student is learning every day, we really want to empower people who are accomplished teachers in particular. Now, there's a number of ways that schools and districts are thinking about accomplished teaching, right? It has to do with what's the currency and language and terms in your own area. I understand that here in New York you have, is it APPR? Learned a little bit about that last night. So you have your educator evaluation system, and it might be through a performance evaluation or some kind of value-added measures or some kind of combination that teachers can be identified. But what's valuable within those systems is if within that system it can help you to understand who's good specifically at what. Because it's not necessarily important that you're identifying who's good at everything, but what are the specific knowledge and skills that particular teachers have that maybe it has areas where they're stronger and areas where they're weaker, but in the areas where they're stronger, they can be leading. So we want to be thinking differentially about that. So the interesting thing about National Board Certification is that not only does it have 5 core propositions that represent these areas of knowledge and skill, but in addition that in some areas, especially where teachers pursue board certification in groups, that schools and districts find that there are specific benefits that represent capital and assets that the district can tap. Specifically, first of all, there's the recognition of the knowledge of content and pedagogy. That if a school or district has an initiative for which it's, or a role, formal or informal, for which it's important to have strong content knowledge or pedagogical knowledge, that National Board is a good way to be able to identify that. But more importantly and more uniquely is the fact that the board certification process is a written process in which one needs to defend the choices that they're making in teaching. And that for certain roles, it's really valuable to have somebody who's articulate about teaching. Not just having somebody who's, the maverick teacher who can just like make it all happen and work, but actually explain why they make it happen and work. That makes it an organizational asset, their knowledge, not just an individual asset. So that's pretty important about board certification. The other piece that we hear from principals about it is that, that the emphasis on the commitments, certain commitments that board certified teachers have. Commitments to collaboration, commitments to student learning, to students and student learning, and commitments to reflection. And if there's a principal who's concerned about, I really want my staff to be more reflective, it's really hard for the principal from their position to say, okay, be more reflective. But that's the kind of thing you really want to build a culture of reflection, and that board certification can be a way to help build that as a culture within the school. So something that teacher leaders, that individual teachers can be thinking about, again, whether they're interested in formal or informal leadership, and school and district leaders might be thinking about cultivating this among their staff so that teachers are assets they can tap, would be thinking about these two systems. So there's a folder on the webpage you just pulled up that says Become Accomplished Teachers. And there's links there to resources where you can learn more about these things. Next, teacher leaders also, we discussed this earlier. Being able to lead in an area is different than having just accomplished teaching. And so just because one is good at teaching second grade doesn't mean that they can run a grade level data meeting or contribute to designing an aligned curriculum, aligning curriculum to the Common Core. There's actually leadership skills leadership expertise that are really important here. So there's a number of resources, again, they're all linked in a folder. This is the folder called Develop Leadership Expertise. I'm not going to take you through all of them. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the BTLC program. And the others will be there for you to explore on your own. But briefly, the Center for Strengthening the Teaching Profession is really one of the first national organizations that I know of that brought teacher leaders together, experienced teacher leaders together, and had them create a skills framework to think about what are the knowledge and skills that a teacher leader needs to know and be able to do for the kinds of roles that they hold. And further, they have an online self-assessment tool, which is a great way for people who you're supporting to think about leadership. You know, this is a tool you can use. You can have them take the self-assessment and help them think about, well, what are some of the leadership skills I want to develop.
And that's in their folders.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah, I did see that's on the left side of the folder, colorful flyer. The Teacher Leader Model Standards was a national effort a few years ago to identify domains of teacher leadership. And so this identifies domains are different areas in which teachers might lead. But it's less a skills framework. It doesn't tell us what teacher leaders have to know and be able to do to lead in those areas, but it gives you an idea of the range of ways teachers might lead. And the program that I developed in Boston, the Boston Teacher Leadership Certificate Program, is a program that specifically, again, we convened experienced teacher leaders, and we said, what are the knowledge and skills that you need for the roles you hold? And we supported them to design graduate courses that could teach those skills to others. So this is actually a skill building program. It's 4 36-hour courses that teachers go through, and they develop skills in these 4 areas. So you can read more about those programs. About all 3 of these areas, again, under that folder on the website. So let's talk about school and district leaders. Because teacher leaders in their schools, they can't just say, okay, you know, I'm going to lead. And there are ways in which they are influencing, again, informal and informal ways in their schools. But the school structures are important as well. So this article here in orange is also in your folder, but I believe it's, I think I put it in the folder on the website. And the article gives the backstory of how we developed these 4 leadership discussion guides, because it's important for school and district leaders to address a couple of key areas with their teacher leaders. So just to give you a little bit of that story, you know, through the BTLC program, these courses that we have supported, in these courses, we have exit flips at the end of every session, and we've asked teachers, well, what makes it easy or hard? Well, what will make it easy or hard for you to implement in your school what you've learned today in class? And over time, we've collected lots and lots and lots and lots of responses to that question, probably close to 2,000 different responses. And so about a year ago, we took those responses and we just sorted them by what makes it easy, what makes it hard, really went into the ones that make it, the ones that make it hard. But going into both of them, we tried to see what was there that we could use to strengthen our program and build into the courses things that would help make it easier. Well, we found, in fact, 4 areas where there's really not much we can do from a graduate school point of view, from our graduate program, our courses. We can give people coping skills if they don't have, if there's not trust in their school. We have a course that teaches people to build trust on their teams, but at the school level, at a certain point, there really has to be a conversation with the principal. The same thing with shared leadership. Oftentimes, these formal teacher leaders that we're working with hold a formal role, but it's unclear to them, and oftentimes it's unclear to the principal. The principal just hasn't thought about what's my vision for how we're co-performing leadership in this school? How do all the leaders fit together? That's been an important conversation that principals and their teacher leaders need to have. Authority is important. A lot of teacher leaders are just unclear about, well, can I do that? What's for my decision? Or they make a decision about something and then the principal comes in and overrides it. There needs to be clarity about what's the authority of this role that I have. It's a formal role. And even more important with authority is that there not only has to be an understanding between the teacher leader and the principal, but other colleagues in the school also need to understand what they can and can't expect you to be doing. And that's too often very unclear. And time. Time is another one. Of course, you can't pull time out of nowhere. There's not ways to sort of create time. I haven't figured that one out yet. But we also can think about how to use the time that we do have more efficiently. And oftentimes, teacher leaders need to have a conversation with the principal about how to make sure that happens. So what we've created is these discussion guides. There are 4 downloadable guides, again, from the link, and they're described in the article. And what we recommend is that these are guides were written so that teacher leaders can approach the principal and say, hey, can we look at this together? But we hope that school and district leaders who you work with will actually call together their teacher leaders from time to time. If they were to have a monthly or quarterly meeting with the teacher leaders in their building, this would be some almost like lesson plans or guides that they could use to help have the conversations that need to be had. And this one here is about establishing structures. And what we notice is that there are some logistical aspects to the design of the roles that are important. One of the tools that's linked there is this census tool. Oftentimes, actually, I have yet to work with a school or district that already has really kept a list somewhere in the district of what are the roles that people hold in our school and district, like formal as well as less formal ones. What are the range of roles that people are holding and who's in charge of them? Who appoints them? We have turnover in Boston. The principal turnover is just out of control. Like 30% of schools or something each year have a new principal. New principal comes in, doesn't even know who holds a role in their building. It was appointed by someone else. Nobody knows how long they've held it, what the job is. Principals will say, oh, you mean I'm in charge of it? And who's supporting them? I don't know. So it's really important to have, for organizations and school districts really, to take a census of the roles that are happening. And it's a really enlightening exercise. As you go through thinking about what are the roles and how they compensated and supported, oftentimes you notice maybe an imbalance of how different things are compensated. You'll also notice things about support that could be happening together. If somebody's bringing in training for your mentors, for example, maybe there are other teacher leaders in the district who can also be taking advantage of that resource that the district has put out. So that's a really valuable tool that districts might use. I do know some unions have also thought about that being their role. This is just sort of being a clearinghouse in a place where we're just keeping track of the kinds of roles teachers are holding. And then establishing structures are important. Having a written job description goes a long way to addressing some of the things that I mentioned earlier about authority, a lack of clarity around authority. I told you why I think compensation is important. But how teachers are actually selected, and people talked before about, well, how are my colleagues going to follow my lead? are they going to believe in me as a leader? Well, kind of goes back to earlier. If you're an accomplished teacher and recognized as an accomplished teacher through deed, not through title, then you'll be recognized. But the selection and appointment process also, if it's not transparent, people may think that you were just a teacher leader because you owed the principal a favor or whatever reason, right? That you didn't really earn that position. And supervision and support is important. Again, there's tools on the website to help with this. In the folder labeled Established Structures. So, and you're already on this page there. And what I wanted to do is give you a few minutes to look through these folders, take a second to talk to the people who you're sort of sharing a screen with, and in a few minutes we'll see if you have questions.